So really, I mean, selections are kind of the first basic thing that makes sense to kind of cover because anytime we want to isolate something or combine images, selections are what we have to make. And there's a bunch of different ways to make selections in Photoshop. I'll cover the main ones, and then there are some ways that we'll cover in later classes, but I'm going to start just by real quickly grabbing one of those files. Let's see. We'll try this guy because he looks a little bit challenging. And I'm also going to grab that. That'll work. All right. So there are several different ways to make selections. And most of our selection tools we're going to find in Photoshop up here. There we go. And I'm working in, which workspace am I in real quick, just so you know. Oh. I'm in the Essentials default workspace. And most of our selection tools can be found over here on our Tools menu in the first couple of slots. So we've got, these are just marquee selection tools. Second down, these are the different lasso tool options. And then magic wand and our object selection tools. The object selection tool is really kind of a little bit AI based, but we're going to look at it anyway because it does make the process. I mean, selections are one of those kind of mundane processes that if we can make them a little bit easier, that's really kind of nice. But the thing about like the AI tools is they do their best to identify a specific object and do a decent job at it. It really depends upon the amount of contrast between the edges of the what you want to isolate and the background and that kind of thing. So you might get some areas that are nice, really clean selections, and some that are a little less so. But they do a fairly decent job. But there's a bunch of different tools to use. You use the right tool for the purpose every time. So we'll kind of just start with these marquee selection tools. Are basically, you've got a rectangle, an ellipse, and then a couple of row options. So if I use the ellipse, I can just click and drag out an area. If I put my cursor right in the middle of it, I can move it around, position it a little bit better. Maybe actually I want to make sure the head's right in the middle, something like that, maybe. From that selection, I can copy that, and maybe I come over here to my layers panel. I want to turn off add a new layer, turn off my background layer, and paste that right there. So, whether it's a circle tool, the circle one, or the square, it's the most simple and most basic of the tools. But what's kind of nice to point out with that is, even though it's really simple, you've got some other options with it. By combining keys, we can, with that selected, if I hold down the Shift key, I can drag and I can add to that marquee. Even better yet, if I hold down my Option key, I can subtract from it. And I can switch between different shapes and work with them that way. So even though they're the simplest and most basic, they still have, a decent value because you can do very simple, quick kinds of selections that way. If you make a selection, you want to get rid of it, you either just click off out of the outside of it, or if you hit Command D on your keyboard, that deselects it. So while I'm working too, I've got a little app that shows what keys I'm touching on the keyboard. If, I've sort of zoomed in on my image. If I hit the space bar, it changes the pan. It allows me to move around this space. And the other thing that I'll do an awful lot, but always forget to point out, is Command plus helps me zoom in. Command minus helps me zoom out quickly. 3-button mouse with a wheel, you can also hold down the Option key, and depends on how your mouse is configured, I guess, but I'll usually just use plus and minus tools to zoom in and zoom out. So if you see me do that, that's what I'm doing. Command plus zooms in, Command minus zooms out. Hold down the space bar, allows me to pan around the workspace. All right. So back to my elliptical marquee. I clicked and I drug out an oval. I can shift and add to it, hold down the Option and select from it. Command D, I'll deselect that. But if I know that this eyeball, I want to be right in the center of whatever selection that I make, place my cursor there, hold down my Option and my Shift keys. Well, my Option key anyway. Shift will constrain it to a perfect circle. But that way I can draw my ellipse out from what I want to be the center point. So just a lot of miscellaneous key commands. The better we can get using the keyboard, the faster we can be creating images. Along with our selection tools, there's also a select menu item, which allows us to do a few things. And we'll spend a bit of time up in here. But if I go under modify, I can feather that selection. Maybe I'll select the feather radius of 48. Then if I copy that, I'll hide that, and paste it, we get a feathered edge. .48 might have been a little too little, but feather, we can expand. So that's the shape I want, but maybe it's a little bit too small. If I do select, modify, expand, maybe I expand it by 72 pixels, and it'll grow. So the thing about selecting values like that, this is a rather large image. 5,400 pixels wide. So the value that you select there kind of depends upon the size of your image overall. If I'd have used 75 pixels pixel expansion on an oval within an image that's only 500 pixels wide, the result would have been an awful lot different. It would be much more drastic. So I can expand. Contract, same deal, 120, make it smaller. And we'll kind of stick with those for the time being. Go back to there later. So we can use all of these tools, together. But those are the, that's the basic set of marquee tools. And tapping the M key on your keyboard invokes that, and it'll always invoke the one that was last used, whatever's sitting on top here. Remember that little arrow next to a tool says that there's other options behind it. So if I go to this tool, but tap the M, it'll go back to marquee and it'll use the circle. So those are very basic shape selections. If we come down here to the next set, our lasso, there's a selection brush lasso, polygon lasso, and a magnetic lasso. So the regular lasso tool basically allows us to draw around a subject. To select it, and we can always tell we've got a selection too with these little marching ants, as they refer to them. But I can adjust that, kind of move it. So long as I've still got the lasso tool selected and I click inside of it, I can adjust that. Again, I can use my shift key. If I think I maybe cut off some of these fins, I can hold down my shift key, enlarge that a little bit. You can use the lasso tool for either very general, quick, rough outlines, or you can also use it to do a little tighter. Let's say, if I hold down the Option key, for instance, I could come in here and do a little bit tighter movements. Kind of tough to do with a mouse, honestly. A pressure tablet, pencil tablet would work better for that, but so we can, make rough selections that way, and then go in and fine-tune them. We can also go back and grab a polygon lasso. As long as we hold down that shift key, maybe it's actually, let's do this. Sometimes a polygon lasso is good for, except that I did it backwards. If you deselect by accident, just Command Z will bring it right back. And we can go about, roughly outlining things with our lasso tools that way. So let's see. What else makes sense before I move on? Yeah. So big, quick kind of outlines. Selection brush tool will allow you to kind of brush and make a selection. Add, subtract. I don't really use that one this much in this context. There's a selection brush tool as well in this another set of selection tools that I'll use, but I find other tools to be a little bit more intuitive, I guess. So, and then we've also got down here in this third set, object selection, quick selection, and magic wand. So magic wand will, let's try that one first. Magic wand, if you just click in an area, like I'm just going to, generally magic wand works best when you've got an area of very similar tone and color. So to use the magic wand tool within the tigerfish will work, but it's more work. So if I want to isolate the tigerfish, what I might actually want to do is click out here in the water area. Oops. Click out here in water area, and it'll, select anything of a similar color. So we can adjust that though. That's fairly tight. And if I want to use a setting like that, this is set with a tolerance of 20. I can hold down my shift key and, select larger areas. But I can also go up here and change my tolerance. So let's change it to 60. If I click back in the same area, I get a bigger selection. So again, it's kind of one of those tools that I think is better suited for high contrast areas where it's an easy selection to make. But it does work in a pinch. And then if you want to go in and kind of fine tune some areas, we could lower our tolerance to say 10. Maybe 20. And sort of grow those selections. The tigerfish, though, I'm thinking not the best candidate for the magic wand tool. But it is good for some other objects. I've got for instance, I've got this fish where I've got a lot, fairly high contrast. That does a fairly good, quick job. I think it also helps that this image originally, I think, was isolated and placed on a background. But you kind of see the difference. It's a very even background. And compared to this one, you get, kind of different results. But it works, and it's good for an initial large, selecting a large area, then you can go in and kind of refine it. So when I selected here, I just selected this background area, but and I'm not going to copy it, I'll just delete. I can delete that background area if I want. But because that's the area that's selected. If I really wanted to select the fish, I can just go back up here to the select menu, and there's the fourth item down is inverse. It's Command-Shift-I. select that, and that'll invert the selection. So now it's my fish that's selected. If I hit the delete key, it deletes the fish. Command-Shift-I is a good one to get used to, especially when working with selections. So let's hop back over here to this now. So that was our magic wand tool. There's a quick selection. I'm going to jump to the object selection tool. This quick selection, actually, is more of a paintbrush kind of a thing and allows me to paint basically the area that I want to select. I'm starting to wish I would have selected the clownfish or something. Been a simpler selection. But you know, the paintbrush tool does a decent job. If I tap the bracket keys, the close bracket will increase the size. There's that. The close bracket will increase the size of my brush. The open bracket will decrease the size of my brush. Again, you know, an object here with a lot of different contrast changes. If I go and look at an image though like this one and use that brush, it's a lot quicker selection. The complexity of the object you're trying to outline really kind of makes a difference as to what you use, I think. This lionfish just isn't good for anything aside from maybe for most of these. Just because the values are so close in a lot of these areas. But I like the image, so. All right. So let's take a look at the object selection tool. Object selection tool does a fairly decent job. When you hover over an area, it tries to decide what it is you want to select, and it highlights it for you. Out here, it doesn't know what to do, but in here, it seems to. If I select that, again, depending on the object that you're selecting, does a better job sometimes than others. That's why having all of these different tools to work with is kind of important, because no single tool does the job in every case. And we're really never, I'm kind of like trying to make selections with single or just very few clicks. But most of the time when we're isolating objects, we won't be doing that anyway. We'll be combining different processes, saving selections, that type of thing. So, but just to kind of run through the tools, that's the way they work. If you hover, like I said, if you hover, you can select an area. But it's also got options. You can tell it, you know, anything within this rectangular area, look at, or look at anything within this lasso area. So if I choose the lasso, and instead of just clicking there, if I come out here and do that, it's basically highlighted anything that it could find within that lasso area. Square or rectangle. same concept, but inside of a rectangular area. So that selected everything, but. So, but as far as the selection tools proper go, that's the setup. So we can make selections of objects any number of ways like that. They're only one part of the equation, one part of the solution. But real quick, the other option is to, and we're not going to get into, I'm not going to get into doing layer masks today. We're going to leave that for next week. But, you know, we can also use a pen tool and trace an object. We all remember the pen tool from any other Adobe app we've ever used. This works pretty much the same, this works the same way. Hold down your Option key, it changes directions. Zoom in. You know, we could go around, highlight an area. If I hold down my Option key, change directions. So the pen tool is another way to make selection. Once you've outlined your object, you save it as a path, and then you can make a selection of that path. So that's outside of the selection tools themselves. The pen tool is another way you can go about that. All right. So let's go to an image that's a little simpler for now to use. Let's use this guy. All right. So we looked at all of those, and making selections is good. The thing is that a lot of times when you select an object, sometimes you only have one use for it, I guess. But a lot of times you want to be able to get that selection back later on. Use that selection over and over again, and Photoshop will allow us to save selections. So if I've got, and I think for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to use the object selection tool. Select this guy. Got him selected. We can save that selection by going up to our select menu, save selections, give it a name, and I'm going to leave everything checked here. Notice that under operation, new channel is checked. This is going to save our selection, but what it does is it saves it as an alpha channel. So I gave it a name, I'll say OK. If I go away and do something else, and I need that selection back, I come back up to my select menu, load selection, and any selections I have saved within my file will show up right here. I'll grab that, say OK, and it brings my selection back. So we save selections, reload them. I don't know if you noticed on the panel, but load selection, there's an invert checkbox which would load the inverse of the saved selection. So in this case, if I check invert, it actually selected the entire background area around the fish. If I tap delete, I can remove that. So I can save as many selections as I want. So for instance, with this guy, I saved the fish overall. But let's zoom in here. And I'm going to use a magic wand tool, I think. Yeah, we'll see how this works. Tolerance is set to 20, and I'm just going to click in the white areas. If I hold down my shift key, I can expand that, selection. I probably should have changed my tolerance. I could have probably done that in fewer clicks. Maybe I'll change that to 30. Hold down my shift key and select. Kind of grow that. Hold down my shift key and come over here to this white stripe. I'm just going to do this kind of quick. Whatever I'm doing here can always be done better. I'm just kind of trying to do them quickly so I don't take forever trying to fine tune. But I've selected just the white areas. I can go back up to my select menu, save this selection, fish white, and let's do 60, see if we can speed this up. And then I'm going to select very quickly the orange selections. Remember that tolerance that I keep changing? That changes the range of the color range of the pixels around where I click. So a real low number, 10 for instance, will only select the pixel that I click on plus anything within a range of 10 pixels of that. Upping it to 60, it'll select anything with a color range of 60 pixels, color pixels outside of that. So that's why I get bigger selections the higher I take that number up. And I'm just going to quickly do that. And I'll make a selection out of that. Save this selection. And this will be fish orange. So now, when I go back into my select, load selection, there are all the different selections that I saved and that I can retrieve. And where does it save those selections, you might ask? This is where alpha channels come in. So remember that in our channels panel over here, ta-da, it has our composite channel and then our red, green, and blue channel. But all of these selections, it's saved as alpha channels. So these are additional channels within the channels panel that I can go back to at any time I need to. So if I want to, and I can also look at these channels alone and by themselves. And actually when I look at these as channels, I see how bad those selections actually are. I probably should have spent a little more time going in and trying to sort of fine tune those edges, which I normally would. And actually, which I'll do real quick with this one would be easy. So I'm going to go back up here to my select, load selection. I want my orange areas. Let's zoom in on this. So remember that I can use any of these selection tools to add and subtract to the selection. So if I'm going to just use my lasso tool, And over here, if I hold down the shift key, it'll add to it. If I hold down the option key, it'll subtract from it. So I'll just hold down my shift key. And I can kind of clean up some of these edges fairly easily. Oops. I'm doing the orange, not the black. So I could just do wrong option is what I wanted. Sort of refine some of those edges by going back in with a lasso tool. Maybe a selection brush. Maybe I want to refine this eyeball a little bit. I can use all these selection tools together. Go back over. And actually, I should take the time to do the fine tuning whenever I make the selection in the first place. If I have to go back and do that again, I can, once I make that selection, I can select the channel that I was working on, and I can either replace it, add to it, subtract, or intersect from it. So I'll just replace it, and that puts my changes into place on it. So multiple selections bring up multiple channels here. So with our alpha channels, if I select, I've got my RGB selected here, all the eyeballs are on. If I select one of these, it'll actually show the black area as red within my RGB view. If I turn that one off, basically it's anything that's black within this channel is turning red. And that's just kind of the preview. But, so with AlphaMasks and any other mask, whether it's in Photoshop, whether it's in After Effects, whether it's in Illustrator, it doesn't really matter. White always is opaque. That's the area that I'm seeing. Black is always transparent. So, you know, I can even go back into these channels and work within these alpha channels. They're just raster, they're raster images basically. So if I decide that I want to modify, so aside from the way I just modified my orange channel, actually let's go look at that one. You know, I modified and cleaned up a few little areas there by, you know, kind of going back and forth. If I want to clean some additional areas up here, and turn that on, and actually the orange to red is a little difficult to see, but I could zoom in on that. I could go over here to my tools panel, grab a paintbrush, and switch back to a regular brush real quick. And I can, let's use a channel that's easier to see the difference of. So if I select that channel, I've got a paintbrush. I could paint around within this and change the mask. So I can paint with a paintbrush inside of there as well to refine, and basically that's refining my selection is kind of what I'm doing. I just did that with a, we'll play around with brushes probably a little more here in a minute, but if I right click, I can change the hardness. I had it set to 0, so it's going to be soft edged. Drop it up to 100. And now, when I select that, this is going to be part of that selection channel. I don't always have to go up here to load my selection. Now that I know that this is where a selection is actually saved to, I can select that particular channel, go down here to the bottom of the palette, and there's a couple of options. There's a new channel, trash, but there's a little dotted circle here. If I click on that dotted circle, it'll select the white areas of that channel. So that's how I can get my selection back as well. And if that kind of illustrates, what I've got. If I delete that, let's do this. Unlock that layer. If I delete that, that's kind of what I'm left with. So it's all the selection tools, how they're actually saved when we save those selections. One more thing about channels, and this goes for anytime you're using a channel as a mask or anything like that. Remember, white is opaque, black is transparent. Grays are transparency. So first I need to get rid of all this stuff that I sort of scribbled around. Quick keyboard shortcut too. If you're working within masks or alpha channels, white and black, and over here are paint options. Our foreground color is black, our background color is white. If we tap the X key, that'll flip those. So I need to paint white, I'll just tap the X key. I want to enlarge my brush and paint white over top of all this black so I have my mask back. All right. Tap X again, black becomes my foreground color. If you've got colors in there, it's not black and white, you can tap D on the keyboard. D will revert the color swatches here, foreground and background, to black and white, or white and black. Again, X will flip back and forth between. So if I'm, masking out an area here, I'm doing that and I need to switch to white, I can just tap a key on my keyboard and do so. All right, so grays. And I'm going to do this with true grays, and I'm just going to kind of guess a little bit. I'm going to, select that mask, and I said down here at the very bottom, we can click on that dotted circle. But I can also hold down the Command key and click right on that mask, and that'll make a selection of that area as well. And I'm going to turn my RGB back on so I can see. So the ends of these fins are kind of translucent. The reason they're dark here is that our original background image was dark and we could see through them. So I can give these a little bit of translucency by maybe instead of black, I want to go with gray. And I'm just kind of guessing at a gray. I'll zoom in here. And and I'm just going to do it with a big brush, but I went ahead and selected this shape because I didn't want, when using my paintbrush, it's only going to paint inside of the selection area. I guess I should have mentioned that earlier. Anytime you've got a selection and you paint or you draw on your canvas, it'll only paint within the area that's selected. So I've got a gray, I've got my channel selected here. I'm just gonna sort of paint that area. We'll just sort of loosely paint this area. And we'll loosely paint this area. So now, if I turn off my image area, my mask now has these gray areas in it. And if I select now, copy that, or select it, I want to turn on my photo image, come back up here, and let's just copy the fish. I'm going to turn him off, create a new layer, paste him into it, and then create another layer. And just so we can see what we've got, painting this layer behind him. You can see that we can see through those fin areas, but not the body. So when you make the select with gray tones inside of an alpha channel, you make that selection, it maintains that the transparent nature of that color. This becomes really powerful when you consider that color channels are all black and white channels. The red, the green, and the blue are all black and white, right? So you can theoretically copy one of those channels, adjust the levels on it to increase contrast, and you can use those as a mask, or those as an alpha, to mask specific objects as well. So, knowing how channels work is kind of really just simply the ammunition to use to kind of figure out how you can get, great, cool results out of your selections. These are really bad selections, but so just remember that, we've gone from making selections with these tools to working inside of these alpha masks to really refine what we've got. You can have multiple alpha masks inside of an image or inside of a document. And you really kind of want to do that a lot of times to be able to sort of layer your effects. And there's more I want to do with that to kind of show the real practical nature of it. But before I do that, there is one additional selection tool that I want to look at real fast. And I'll just turn all those off. So if I use my let's use the object selection tool and just select our fish real quick. We've got our selection. As long as we have one of our selection tools selected here, the control bar along the top will give us this option for select and mask. And what this is kind of a advanced masking system, I guess a little bit, that gives you a lot more refined control over the selections you make. So it made the selection. And I've got different ways that I can view this selection. By default, it's using an overlay. I'm going to do let's see. You can view it a variety of different ways. Black and white is nice so you can see the progress of your map, of your actual mask, without the distraction of your image. I usually use it as overlay. I had this cranked way up because of what I was doing earlier, something I was doing earlier, but you can also adjust the density of that mask area. And we've got some different presets here. So I'm going to start with the smooth. Smooth won't have a huge effect on this particular image because the edges are already fairly smooth. Remember when we used the magic wand tool and it got like really noisy, really gritty? Smooth will actually smooth out. If we use that to make our mask, smooth will actually smooth out a lot of those rough edges. So yeah, it was gritty and kind of ugly, but we can kind of smooth a lot of those areas out if we use the smooth tool within select and mask. We can also feather these edges, which I almost always feather any selection I make by about a half a pixel anyway, regardless of what, even if it's a hard-edged item. Nothing, I mean, look around this room, you know? Nothing has a truly, like, knife, razor-sharp edge to it. There's always a little bit of a blur to the edge. So usually with my selections, I'll do like a half a pixel, and it's not much, but it's enough to help things really kind of feel natural where they're sitting. But we can feather it that way. We can also feather it through the select menu. But if we crank feather way up, you'll see it feathers off that edge. Contrast will modify the way the edge behaves in real subtly toned areas. Like if it blends very gradually from a dark into a light, it'll adjust how that area looks. Shift edge will expand and contract a little bit. So if I shift it plus 100, you'll see that it shifted the mask so that it's picking up a border edge of my background. But if I go the other direction, it'll tighten it up. And when we looked at this before, I noticed that when I had painted blue behind it, I had sort of a very faint, dark halo on the edge. This is a way to kind of go in and fix that. If I can slide shift edge in the negative direction, it'll pull that mask in and eliminate overlap. So once we do that, we can say, okay, That'll leave with our selection, and we can go ahead and save that selection as well. New outline, say OK. And then there's that new one. Back to my layers. Invert and delete my background. That wasn't what I wanted to do. What did I do? There. All right. So we use these objects to make these tools to make selections, and then we make, we make refinements to those. So, of the files that you downloaded, here's the one I want you to open. We're not going to work with the fish. We're going to work with this one right here. Drop that on the Photoshop. And what I played around with earlier on this was my desktop. This is my demo file that I worked with earlier, which is basically we're going to use masks. We're going to do different kinds of masks and isolate the horse. But what I like about this particular image is, like I said before, not everything is a super simple selection, and this is one of those. We've got hair off the tail of the horse, a lot of dust around the feet. It's not a super simple job, all right? And, remember when you're thinking about your projects, part of the point to this project is to make selections, masks, use layering to build out a composition. So that's what we're going to do here. All right? So within my demo, what I did was, the fish doesn't even really matter. But I kind of quickly isolated the horse. And I also isolated some of the dust around its feet, because this particular horse, nothing's clearly defined around the feet. There's all this dust being kicked up. It only makes sense that I'm going to want to include some of that in whatever I do. That's what's going to help it have a better feel like that horse, whether it's in the middle of a brown background or not. He's got dust kicked up around his feet. He at least feels like he's actually standing there, working there. And we can build these out on, we'll build these out within different layers and integrate type. I've got this object. I don't even need the brown layer, really. I can do the horse, turn on my type, and I've got the word wild in my image, but it's behind the horse, being partially obscured by the dust. That's, the kind of blending and that we really kind of want to work towards. All right? So what we're going to do is, and actually, we're only going to use selection tools for the horse part. This dust area, we're going to do this solely as an alpha channel. So here's kind of how this is set up and what we're going to do. I do have, I think, I did not. So I do have, if we look at our channels, I've got several different alpha channels. I've got, let's see, I've got the horse, which was a quick, rough kind of a mask, the horse and the woman. And then I also did just the dust area, but I'm kind of toying around with the brush tool a little bit and using some different brushes to get different effects. The nice thing about layering alpha channels like this is that if I want to select my horse, I can hold down my command key and click on that alpha channel. But then I can also hold my command key down still, hold down my shift key, click on the dust. That'll add it to that selection, which is actually how I made my composite channels. But let's see, turn all those back on. And if I come down here and just copy that selection, make a new document real quick, paste it in there, I get all of the dust and everything right along with it. So alpha channels get to be pretty, that's not what I want to look at, just hide that, don't save it. This one. You know, we can get some pretty complex alpha channels to create what we want. And knowing that they're in alpha channels, we can modify these really pretty easily. So you should have this image. Let's start by trying to isolate okay, so just usually what I do with think class exercises, we do them, and I do have you upload them to Brightspace. I got to put the assignment there for it yet, and it's a no points assignment, but it's considered at the end of the semester. So it's any exercise we do in class, you do have to turn in. So keep that in mind while we're working. So let's do. Zoom back. We're going to make several different masks, all right? So maybe we can start with a couple of simpler ones. I want to make a mask for the sky, which basically becomes a mask for the sky, which will serve for our foreground and background both, all right? And then we're going to make a mask or a selection for the horse, and we'll have a selection for the dust. And we're going to make those all separate selections. So why don't we go back here to our layers panel. And what I want you to do is just to do a couple of very simple things. Let's go to let's say the third one down, and I want you to select the magic wand tool. Let's do a real simple selection first. So the magic wand tool, I'm going to select the sky. So if I click on the sky, Were you able to get, did your magic wand select most of the sky, or did you get like a corner of it? The corner of it? Yeah? Okay. So remember that the tolerance has an effect on how much is actually selected by that magic wand. So why don't we hit Command D on your keyboard to undo your selection. Set your tolerance to 10 and click. You should get something kind of like that, right? Tolerance being right up here in the control bar. All right, so Command D will deselect that. Let's change that to 30. Oops. And click in here and see what we get. We get more. And if we change it to 60, we get even more. And actually, wait, what all did that give us? Well, let's try that again. 60. All right, so that brings us down pretty close to our horizon line. I might try bumping that to 70 or 80. Yeah, 80. Let's do 80. See, that got us kind of down in tight. I mean, there's some stuff we missed, but that's okay. We can either get that later, or maybe we don't even care. You know, the quality of selection you need to do also largely depends upon what you're putting together, you know. When I was isolating the fish, I was putting them on like a clear background or a white background, and I could see those dark edges. The fact that the translucent fins were kind of dark was really distracting. But if I take that and I put it on an aquarium background with sort of darker colors, all of a sudden, a lot of those imperfections kind of disappear and are not as important. So always kind of keep in mind what it is you're doing. And that's not to say that we don't want to, from a craft point of view, that we don't want to make sure that our selections are as good as they can be, but just know that the way you're using it has an effect on how you'll approach things as well, you know? So we've got our sky selected. So let's save that selection, because I don't want to have to do test tolerances again. So go to your select menu and save selection, and just give it a name. Let's call it sky. Yeah. You have what? So it should be like the fourth tool down, but if you click, there should be several tools in there. Let's see. Maybe it's the tool set. Yeah, the workspace makes a difference sometimes. I guess I could have shown you where to go. There is actually, I'll show you another way to go get those. But so we've got our sky, and actually, let's do that. Say OK. So we've saved that selection. And if we take a look over here in our channels panel, scroll to the bottom of it, there's our sky. After everything I showed you, I'm going to kind of show you the way I generally tend to do things. I make broad selections the way I showed you and the way we just did. But when it comes time to refine things, I usually go into the alpha channels and actually do that. So we got our sky, and I know that there's some things I'm going to have to fix on that. I can see that already, but like it kind of got a little bit greedy in here. Actually, let's fix that. Do we still have our sky selection? Do we still have the marching ants for that? So let's do this. Kind of zoom in. Like on mine, it's kind of greedy. It's kind of bleeding into her shirt. Is yours doing the same thing? Yeah. So if you've got that kind of thing, just go up here and grab your lasso tool and zoom in on an area because it's easier to work with. And just hold down, because this is the selection out here, the sky area, I actually want to subtract this part from my sky mask because I don't want to select her shirt. So if I hold down the option, I got my lasso, hold down your option key, and just kind of try to draw along her shoulder. Nice thing is you don't even have to do it all. Do a section until like you got to move your hand and you know it's going to mess it all up. Then just kind of zip around in here like this. And then keep going down that way. That'll at least initially kind of clean up her shoulder areas a little bit. I really don't like using a mouse to do this part, but it's okay. So I just kind of wanted to clean up her shoulders there, and actually I want to get rid of all of that. So you able to follow along with what I did? There are other ways we could have done that, but I think that's a okay way to go about it. So once you've done that, kind of cleaned up that shoulder area a little bit, there's really just a few little things. Once you've done that, go back to your select menu, down to save selection, and what we actually want to do is where it says channel new, click on that and you should see your sky that you already made. Select that, and we're just going to replace it. Say okay. There. So we cleaned up that sky just a little bit. Probably needs more, but all right. So we all have our sky selection made. All right. So let's do our horse and girl a little differently. Let's go over here, back over here to our tools. And instead of magic wand, let's just use the object selection tool this time. Oh, and I do want you to, if you still, actually, let me escape that. let me undo that. Before we do that, once you've got that sky selection saved, hit Command D on your keyboard to turn off the little marching ants. So now for her, we're going to use our object selection tool. Let's grab it. So if I just hover over top of her, you see that if I hover here, it just selects the back half, it doesn't get her. The AI is being a little too specific, really. Let's do this. Let's tell it to, let's try the rectangle. Instead of hovering over and clicking, let's come and, the one thing I don't like about this tool is the fact is this highlight that it does is really distracting. I want to come out here, click, and drag my cursor and just put a square around her and the horse and see if so it selected the girl as well as the horse. So we have them selected, and why don't we zoom in here, take a look at it. It's gonna need cleaning up, but so we've got that selection. So I use the object selection tool, and I make sure that the mode is set to rectangle, and just click and drag around the girl and the horse. So what I want you to do then is so up here in the control bar, you have select and mask. Let's click on that. And if it doesn't look like, I'm using, for view, here at the very top of that panel, I'm using overlay. And the opacity on that overlay is at about 60%, something like that. So I'm going to kind of zoom in on it though. Looking at, especially on smaller displays, looking at things, out at this zoom level is kind of tough. Yeah. Oh, okay. But I'm going to zoom in just so I can kind of see the detail a little bit. Like, let's see, where are some areas we can fix? There's plenty of areas we can fix, I guess, but. So I'm kind of looking for, this is horrible. So let's go to the tail. And I'm not going to get crazy with this tail and try to separate all of these hairs or anything, but what I do want to do is, while we're in this, select and mask space, we've got some tools over here to the side to kind of refine this mask a little bit. So like this is just a quick selection tool. Right below it is a refine edge brush. Maybe if I pick that brush, come over here on the tail and just kind of paint over certain areas, I'm getting a little more refinement on this tail. So just kind of paint over areas that you want to highlight a little bit, or make sure that you pull out. Hold down your space bar to pan around. I see little areas down in here, I think. Maybe here. You see how whenever I paint over that, it kind of brightens up? And I can go up here and kind of do the same thing in some areas, I think. Let's take a look there. Clean that up around the back of the saddle. So we could kind of refine some of these edges. If I hold down the minus key, that'll select from the mask. We'll kind of get it as good as we can, and then we can always refine it elsewhere. Maybe the hair on the front of his head should be pulled out a little bit. Yeah. I find it does an okay job in most cases, but I still like refining within the masks, within the alpha channels themselves. So we got it close, I think. The only other thing I really kind of want to do is here within these different controls, I'm going to smooth. I just want to smooth the edges a little bit. Just going to slide that over about part way. And I'm going to come down to, we can also do a little bit of edge detection. We do smart radius and crank this up. What's it do? Oh, I don't like that. Edge detection using smart radius and then changing the radius can kind of help identify edges, but in this case it wasn't helping a whole lot. Giving me some weird things. Contrast feather, just a little bit, half a pixel or so. And I want to shift the edge in just a little bit, like minus 30 or so. So that should, whatever our selection was, it should actually contract our mask a little bit, make sure that if we had any dark edges or fringy, frilly kinds of things, that it kind of lops those off. Once we get that to a point, the thing I've found about this tool too, by the way, I like it. It's got some nice controls on it, but it seems like the more you mess with it, the more you try to make it do, it gets, it's a relatively new tool. It's not that old. They've only had it for about a year maybe, something like that. And it always feels like it needs a little bit of work yet, but but it does help kind of refine some edges. It's worth showing since it's there, and I'm sure you'll have to work with it sooner or later. So, but anyways, once we get it all set, go to the bottom and just say OK, which just leaves you with, Leaves us with stuff I want to fix, but at least it's, yeah. Like, it's a little too, it's a little too greedy with the edges and stuff, but we'll go back and fix those, fix what we need and that kind of thing. So, I just figure it does no real good to do these things with subject matter that's like really clearly defined and high contrast, because those are the easy things to do. So all the things that we're doing here will make those isolations a lot faster and better. So we got this selection made. Let's go ahead and go to our select menu, save that selection, call it girl and horse, say okay. So we now have two channels. We've got our sky, or two alpha channels. We've got our sky and our girl and our horse. And then the last we're going to do is the dust. We're going to try and work with that a little bit. So this also gives us an opportunity to play around with brushes a little bit. So go ahead and hit Command D to deselect the girl and the horse. This alpha mask we're going to do a little bit differently. Are we? I don't know. Sometimes trial and error is a good way to go about things as well. What I was going to do is just create a new channel mask, and I was going to paint on it, which we still might do. But I'm going to try the magic wand real quick with a tolerance of like 50. No, it's too much. Let's try 20. Nah, I'm going to want softer edges than that, I think. I don't know. Let's try this. So let's try a magic wand. We might do this two different ways. Take the magic wand. I've got my tolerance set way down to 20. And just kind of click in this dusty area behind the horse. See what you get. And if you hold down your shift key, you can kind of expand that area out. That I don't like. But that's okay. We'll take a look at that here in a minute. That I don't like either. Let's undo a couple of those. I got those selections made. I could go back here and change my tolerance, drop it even more. Let's say to 10. Come back down here, hold down my shift key and click. Maybe around the hoof a little bit. Let's see what this gives us. I don't know. It may not. We may not like it, but. Oh, there. Get rid of some of that. All right. Remember, if you hold down the shift key, you add to the selection. If you hold down the option key and click, you can subtract from it as well. Yeah. If you hold down the shift key and click, you can add to a selection. And then option key is hold down the option key and click, subtracts from it. We'll give that a try. So we got that, and I think I want to do the select and mask thing again because I want to add a feather to it. So So I made that selection. Let's do select and mask. Kind of shows me what I've got. Go here to the feather, slide that out. I feathered it about, I don't know, roughly 20 or something like that. Let's say okay. We probably want more than that, but that's all right, we'll build it. And then, once we've got our selection, let's save that selection again. Save this selection as the dust. And, all right, so we kind of started with all of that. So let's do this. Let's go back over to our layers. Actually, hit Command D to deselect the dust. Let's go back to our layers. We're going to do a couple of things here. So while we're on our layer, by default, when you open an image, its layer is the background layer, and it's locked. All right. I like to leave my original image in case I want to go back to it. So usually what I'll do is I'll right-click on the layer itself, and I'll duplicate it. Give it whatever name you want to give it. So that'll give us a new layer. Basically, it's a duplicate of our background image. And I'm going to turn off the background image. Actually, that may not have been necessary. That's all right. So now what I want to do is add, I'm going to select the background again. So I want to add a solid color to fill the whole thing. I'm going to I'm working on isolating this image. I just kind of want something to work against that doesn't have the distraction of the background. So I probably won't keep it, but so with the background selected, come down here to the very bottom, and you see, so these tools these options down here at the bottom, one actually creates a layer mask, which we'll look at next week. The one right next to it, the circle that's half opaque and half black and half white, if you click on that, these are all of your different adjustment layers. But up at the very top is one called solid color. Select that. And you'll probably get something like this. And I'm just going to adjust the color on this. Make it a brownish color. Because I kind of want a brown, a color that kind of matches the overall tone of the image. It's going to, I think, be helpful while I do this. I know some people will work on bright greens or different really bright colors, but it always makes me do more work than I feel like I really need to do. Because I'm trying to fix things that in the end aren't really going to matter. So I got like a brownish color, say okay. And if I turn off this, click the eyeball, you can see the color that I made. So now, let's see what we got. Just for a dry run. Let's go back to our channels. And I want you to command click on Girl with a Horse channel. And then hold down the command key. And then hold down the shift key. And click on your dust channel. And you'll see that it combines those two. You get a selection of both of them. and then come back out here to our layers. Copy, just Command C on your keyboard, copy. I'm going to hide this layer. Create a new layer. If you come down here to the bottom of the layer panel, the plus sign, the little square with a plus in it, new layer, and paste. So what do we got? It can be better, but it's not horrible. It needs more dust out here and some stuff like that. Yeah. Yeah, sure. So I turned off my main image layer, so the eyeball right next to it, we'll turn it on and off right here. Turn that layer off. Or did you copy the, how far back do you need me to go? Actually, I should ask. All the way, do you have the selection of the dust and the horse? You've got that. Yes or no? Yes. All right, cool. Then back into your layers panel, you've got this right now, I think. Turn off, actually what you want to do is just, if you've got your selection, just hit Command C to copy. Command C on your keyboard. And then turn off that layer and add a new layer, which is this right here, the square with a plus sign in it down here in the bottom corner. And Command V, paste. Not giving you what you want? Okay. All right. Let me get them started refining and cleaning up, and I'll come. You won't be that far off. Why don't you watch me with the refining and cleaning up, and then we'll get you in line. Probably be easiest. All right. So here's how we're going to refine and clean all this up. All right. We'll start with the girl and the horse. So, actually, let's go back to our layers. I'm going to turn this layer off. That was just to sort of see what I had. Let's turn this back on. So we've got our full image. And then, if we come into our channels and turn on the eyeball next to our girl and horse layer so that it's red, like this. Zoom in on it, and you'll see that, and yours might not be exactly the same as mine, but like in mine, you see that the mask is actually coming into the horse area, and I want to fix that kind of stuff. So if I click on this layer, girl and horse, actually this is my channel, my girl and a horse channel, and go over here and grab a paintbrush. Should be about a third of the way down. There's a bunch of options there. You just want a regular paintbrush. So I want to show you a couple of things here real quick that we're going to utilize. All right. So how big is, oh, that's why. All right. So let's set a paintbrush size of about 20 or so. And we want to make sure that we're using our black, because we're working on a channel mask, blacks, whites, and grays are all we really want. So let's make sure that our color swatches over here on our toolbar. Tap D on your keyboard. Whoops. Oh, while that's open, I can't. If you tap D on your keyboard, D? Actually, click the black and white icons up here. So remember, if you tap X, all right, why am I deciding to, there we go. If you tap X on your keyboard, that'll switch your foreground color and background color to be between black and white. With our paintbrush, we are going to, if I right click, I'll get a little dialog box. I'm going to set the hardness to just under 100, 96 or so. And you can adjust the size here if you want. But once you've done that, if you just kind of click up here on your, somewhere I'll dismiss it. So I want to clean up these areas where the mask is overlapping the horse. So since the horse is white in my layer, I want to come over here and make sure that white's my foreground color. So tap X on the keyboard to make it white, and if it's not white, tap X again. You can just come in here while you're on this channel and paint that area of the mask and pull that back out. If you need a smaller paintbrush, tap the open bracket and close bracket keys on your keyboard. Open bracket will reduce the brush size. And you can just kind of go through and clean up. Just look for any areas that the red is overlapping the horse. Adjust your brush, kind of clean those areas up. It's kind of a tedious process, but later on when you've got really clearly defined images, it'll make it a breeze. And you'll just kind of clean up areas like that. Here I can clean up, I think. I know there's an area around my saddle I don't like. Fix that. So at this point, all we're really doing is painting in black and white on our alpha channel. And just, look at it overall. Her shoulder needs some cleanup still. At least on mine it does. But just clean up areas that are going to be noticeable. All right. So going back into these different channels and cleaning those up, I'll kind of leave to you. Let's go down and take a look at the dust channel a little bit. So in mine, and I don't know, yours is probably going to be a little bit different, but in mine, I really need more dust around this hoof and around the front hooves. I got plenty of dust back here, but I also kind of want to clean that up. So we can do that. Let's use the paintbrush to do it. Remembering that white's opaque. Just going to right click, make my brush a little bigger. I'm going to change my hardness. I want dust isn't hard edge, dust is, you know, kind of feathers. So I'm going to drop my hardness on the brush to 0. And rather than going into this with a big, purely white brush, I'm going to go back up here to the mode, or the control bar, and there's an opacity setting. So it's set to 100% right now. I'm going to drop that to about 20-ish. And what's going to happen is, even though I've got white selected, it's only going to put down like 20% of white. And what I can do is I can kind of build on top of that. So I can, you know, sort of just start painting over top of it. And build it up. And if I turn off my RGB layer, I can kind of see what I'm doing. So, whoops. So just kind of use your paintbrush to kind of build a grayscale image to kind of pull out some of this dust. And what I kind of expect here is that this is the kind of stuff that just takes a little bit of work to kind of, and doing it. I'm going to try to pull out some of the dust around the however much you think you need. And if you want to do something that's a little, you know, I'm just using a soft edge brush, which isn't really probably the best thing to use. But again, going back to our paintbrush, if we come up here to our control bar, there is this little folder right here. We'll bring up a bunch of different brushes. And I think I had earlier, I had something like this one. Maybe it was this. Nope, it was this. 284. And you'll see whenever you pull back out over top of your, you'll see how that brush changes. Increase my opacity a little bit. We can kind of and I think it looks kind of suspect on the mask itself, but I think whenever we apply it to our image, And I just kind of use a brush like this by just kind of clicking around. When you drag it, it becomes very patterny looking. I can increase the brush size, reduce it. Which kind of varies the look a little bit. So just kind of work at refining those channels, cleaning up, the masks. And when you're done, or at certain intervals, just kind of do like I did before. Command click on each channel, Command Shift click. Back to our layers. Let's copy. New, paste, kind of see what we get. Actually, that's not horribly terrible. But, play around with some of the different brushes. Remember that you can increase the size of the brush by tapping the close bracket key, and you can reduce it by tapping the open bracket key, just to get some different effects, different looks. And if you get your horse and your person cleaned up, then try the type tool, which is over here on the toolbar. Click up here. When you've got the type tool, the properties panel changes the type options. The color of it, dark red. Incorporate a little type. Give it some reason for actually having